there's, I guess, two questions we're going to consider tonight. Why should we care about the Jewish people? And how do we know that God is real? And they may seem two sort of unrelated questions, but as we go into detail, what we want to see is that they are sort of fundamentally linked in there together. And by answering the first, we can then flow on and consider that second really fundamental question for our own faith and possibly something we ourselves get asked by our friends or think ourselves. How do we know? What proof do we have that God is real? And it's different for everyone. We all have our own proofs, our own reasonings. But there are a few things, so we're going to look at one tonight, another one in a few weeks' time. Creation is another one. There are a few things that God has put into the earth now as signposts, as witnesses, as we'll see, that we can be reassured that God is real. And so let's start with this first question as we consider this. Why should we even look at the Jewish people tonight? Why do we consider them? We've looked at them a lot this year here from this platform. What makes it special? And the Bible is certainly focused on the Jewish nation. Certainly the Old Testament revolves around their whole forming of a nation and their history. We as a community, as Christadelphians, we talk a lot about Israel. We have a book, a famous book, The Hope of Israel. We have Youth nights. We have current event nights where we focus on what's happening in the Middle East and what's happening with Israel. We don't look at what's happening in China and other places. We focus on Israel. Certainly a large part of our religion. So why do we focus on that? What makes that special? What makes them special? Well, as we would expect, thankfully, the Bible has some very clear answers to why the nation of Israel is special, why the Jewish people are special. And the first one is really quite simple and quite amazing. First reason we have here, God loved Abraham and his descendants, and therefore, God loved Abraham, and therefore all of his descendants are special. It's as simple as that. Abraham, Isaac and Jacob were God's friends. He loved them. They got on really well. They were of one mind. And so for all time, because of that, their descendants and all of his friends, family, as God said, God's friend there, would be special and would place a special part in God's plan and in his heart. It's an amazing thing to think about, that the depth of God's love, and it's the same love for us today as well. God loves us the same as he loved Abraham, and that loyalty and that love there is for us as well. And we'll see that that's passed on. Now, there's a couple of verses that highlight this for us. Come across to Romans chapter 11. In Romans, Paul talks a lot about the role of the Jews, both nationally and individually, as Jew and Gentile tries to play out in the New Testament. And let's see what he has to say about the Jewish people and the place that they play in God's plan. So Romans 11, and if we look at verse 25, Paul says, "For I would not, brethren, that you should be ignorant of this mystery, lest you should be wise in your own conceits, that blindness in part is happened to Israel until the fullness of Gentiles come in." And so Paul says that unfortunately at this time that the Jewish people had turned away from God. They could no longer see him and see Christ as their saviour, that they had turned away. But he says that's only in part. It's only for a short period of time until this, as he terms it, the fullness of Gentiles will come. And we'll see this phrase crop up a few times tonight, and we'll look at it a bit later on this evening, God willing. But he continues on. He says at the moment that they're not faithful in the sense that they don't believe Jesus is the Messiah, verse 26. "And so all Israel shall be saved. As it is written, there shall come out of Zion the deliverer, and shall turn away ungodliness from Jacob. For this is my covenant unto them, when I shall take away their sins. As concerning the gospel, they are enemies for your sake. But as touching the elected, they are beloved for the Father's sake." So why are they special? Why are they loved? Why are these people, even though they're not faithful here, Paul says they're still beloved. And why is that? Because of their fathers. Because of Abraham, Isaac and Jacob. So why are they chosen? Why are they special? Because of them and because of the covenant that God swore with those fathers. Come across to Genesis 22 and we'll refresh ourselves on this covenant here in Abraham. So Paul makes it clear whether they believe or not, they're still a special people in God's eyes because of their fathers. So Genesis 22, this covenant that God made with Abraham, their father. Verse 15, we see there, "And the angel of Yahweh called unto Abraham out of the heavens the second time, and said, By myself have I sworn, saith Yahweh, for because thou hast done this thing, thou hast not withheld thy son, thine only son, that in blessing I will bless thee, in multiplying I will multiply thy seed as the stars of the heaven, as the sand which is upon the seashore. And thy seed shall possess the gate of his enemies. And in thy seed shall all nations of the earth be blessed, because thou hast obeyed my voice." And so because Abraham showed amazing faith, amazing trust in God, he was prepared to sacrifice his own son. He said, well, if God has said that the promised seed will come through my son, then no matter what happens, my son must come alive, or God must be working in my life. He believed that much in what God had said that he was prepared to go through with that act. God said because of that, he swore this covenant, swore by himself, no less, that his seed would be as the stars of the heaven, and that in them all nations would be blessed. So there's this covenant given to Abraham. Your seed will exist. Your seed will have a special place in my heart. Now, God is very loving, God is very gracious, but God is also righteous. And although because Abraham's faith, because of that his descendants were considered special, they're not saved by that faith. That's Abraham's faith. That's not their own faith. And so Paul talks about them being outside of faith, not believing, but still being special, but it doesn't apply to their righteousness. They're not saved in that sense, they're not special in that sense, but they do hold a special place in God's heart. If we see this, come a few pages over to Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy chapter 7. So, as a nation, as a people, they are special, but as individuals, they are not righteous in themselves necessarily, unless, of course, they come to their own understanding. So in Deuteronomy chapter 7 and verse 6, we see there, "For thou art a holy people unto Yahweh thy God," a separate, a special people. "The Lord thy God hath chosen thee to be a special people unto himself, above all people that are upon the face of the earth." So once again, we have this confirmation. We're not here considering the Australian population, the Americans, whatever. No, God says the Israeli people, the Jewish people are special. It's clearly spelt out. But, verse 7, "Yahweh did not set his love upon you, nor choose you, because you were more in number than any people, for you were fewer than all the people." So why did he choose you? Because Yahweh loved you. Because he would keep the oath which he swore unto your fathers, hath Yahweh brought you out with a mighty hand, and redeemed you out of the house of bondmen from the hand of Pharaoh king of Egypt. Know therefore that Yahweh thy God, he is God, the faithful God, which keepeth covenant and mercy with them that love him, and keep his commandments 1,000 generations. Okay? So you're not here because you're special, you're not chosen because you're righteous or you're particularly clever than anyone else or any of those things. They're chosen because of God's love for them and for their fathers. And yes, that helps clarify that point for us and clears it up. But this verse is so much more relevant because it applies to us as well. It's the same principle to us, isn't it? We're here tonight not because we're greater in number, because we're smarter than our neighbours, because we're so much better than any of them. No, we're here tonight, same as the Jewish people are special, because we are chosen by God, because Yahweh loves us, because he would keep his oath with Abraham and Isaac and has called us into that hope. That same love and that same mercy, that same calling for us is what we also see in Israel as well. So that's one reason. God loved Abraham because they're special because God loved Abraham. A second point, and really why we're considering them tonight, God has chosen them to be a witness of his existence. This is really the fundamental reason. God has said, the Jewish people are a proof that I am real and that I am working in our lives. So what we're considering tonight is not an academic lesson about prophecies in the Bible or about some nation and trying to pin it all together. What we are looking at tonight is that really fundamental question. How do you know God is real? Well, God says, I don't leave it up to blind faith. Here is an example. Now, Isaiah 43, God presents this in a very graphic way around this exact point about having a witness and a proof of his existence. Come across to Isaiah 43, and we'll look at verse 9. So this is God talking here in Isaiah. And God says, verse 9, "Let all the nations be gathered together, let all the people assemble. Who among them can declare this and show us former things? Let them bring forth their witness that they may be justified. Or let them hear and say it is truth." And so God says, look, everybody come around. Bring your idols. Bring out all of your false gods. Okay, what is your proof? What, you've got your God there. You've got their idol. What's their proof that they're real? What proof can you show me? Sort of almost a court scene here. Prove to me that your idol is better than me. And there's silence. It says, well, what about me? What proof is there that Yahweh is real? What witness is there that God is working alive in the world? Well, verse 10, God says, no answer there. Well, what about me? You are my witness. And we see verse 1, he's talking about the people of Israel. Jacob, Israel. Verse 3 again, Israel. So this is in this context. He says, you want to know how I'm real? You are my witness, saith Yahweh, my servant whom I have chosen, that ye may know and believe me and understand that I am he. He can't stress it anymore. Know, believe, understand. Before me there was no God formed, neither after me. I am Yahweh. Beside me there is no other Saviour. What a powerful set of verses. God plainly challenges any other idols out there and says, I am real, and the proof of my realness is Israel. So that's what we want to consider tonight. Okay, so why is Israel important? Brilliant. Because they are witnesses of God, which leads us to our question, how do we know God is real? Because of the nation of Israel. What about the nation of Israel? Well, there's lots of reasons, but God has gone through and he's almost prophesied or laid out the whole history of this nation. And so we won't go into specific ones in too much detail, but rather I just want to show a broad overview of how can we be confident. What is this witness? What is this proof that God is real? And one of the ways is God says, look, I'm going to prophesy, I'm going to lay out the whole history of this people, in the past, present for us and future, and you will see that I'm completely in control. Not only will I do miraculous works with these people, but I'll prophesy it hundreds, thousands of years beforehand. So let's go back to one of the first prophecies, Genesis 15, and we'll track our way through this wonderful nation and see God's hand inarguably there in this nation as a hope for our faith. Come across to Genesis 15, and here, once again, God is talking to Abraham, and he's going to outline almost the next 1,000 years in a couple of verses. So Genesis 15 and we'll start at verse 13. And he said unto Abram, know of a surety that thy seed shall be a stranger in a land that is not theirs, shall serve them, and they shall afflict them for 400 years. And also that nation whom thou shalt serve will I judge, and afterwards thou shalt come out with great substance, and thou shalt go to thy fathers in peace, thou shalt be buried in a good old age, but in the 4th generation thou shalt come hither again, for the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet full. And so here he has this amazing prophecy. Hundreds of years before Joseph or Moses or Pharaoh or any of those things, God prophesies these key things that are going to happen. And it's almost given matter-of-factly. This isn't some trumpet-blowing amazing prophecy. This comes about because Abraham is questioning. We see in verse 1 and 2 there, God says, look, fear not Abraham. And Abraham's worried, I'm going to go childless. He's been promised a seed and he doesn't understand. And God says, look, don't worry, Abraham. I've got it all under control. Maybe not in the timeline you're expecting, but just for your information, here's the next 1,000 years of time I've got planned out as exactly what's going to happen. So don't worry, Abraham, it's all under control. So it's almost, as I said, a matter-of-factly type thing. Oh, by the way, here's the blueprint for the next few hundred years. And it turns out exactly as God has prophesied. What were some of these prophecies here we have? Jacob and his family went down to Egypt and they will multiply. We see that in Exodus. The Egyptians enslaved them with hard bondage. That's exactly what happened there. God intervened and brought judgment upon Egypt with the 10 plagues. That happened. The Egyptians, devastated by the plagues, urged the Israelites to leave and gave them great gifts. They would go out with lots, as we saw. Now, as well, Abraham would die. So verse 15, we know that, where that prophesied, that happened. And then 40 years later, the nation would take possessions and they would leave Canaan and they would come out exactly as prophesied. Now, we can sometimes lose the power of this because they're Sunday school stories. We all know this, but don't forget, hundreds of years before this even happened, God had it all planned out exactly, and it occurred exactly as God had prophesied. His angels were working there and making those events happen exactly as he told Abraham they would. Now, let's jump forward then to that time period where they come out, they walk through the land of Canaan, they're about to go now into the promised land. Come across to Deuteronomy 28, where we have our reading this evening and another glimpse of these prophecies. So here's now the second part of their history that would be prophesied. And as I said, we didn't want to go through it in detail, so Shem read through, but here's some of the key parts of this chapter that God prophesied would happen. If they disobeyed, hardship and difficult times would come on them. They would be brought out of the land. So even though they were about to go into the land, God said that they would be brought out. They would go into a foreign country. A foreign nation would invade them from afar, a people that they didn't know, speaking a language they didn't understand. That their cities would be besieged, and in the extremities of those siege, as we read, they would be result in eating their own children, and horrific situations. So this wasn't a pleasant siege, but rather a horrific time for the nation. Then they would be removed from their land, and they would be scattered among the nations. And there, while they were out there, they would find distress and even further difficult times out there dispersed among the nations. And so that was prophesied there. Even before they went into the land, God said, this is actually what's going to happen. But it's not just this passage. There's numerous passages that prophesied and continue to prophesy these events would occur to the nation. And so we have them, a handful of them here. Jeremiah 9. I will scatter them among the heathens, whom they neither knew nor their fathers known. I will send a sword after them till I have consumed them. You would be scattered out. Ezekiel 12. They shall know that I am Yahweh. I shall scatter them among the nations and disperse them in countries. Similar language all the way through. Zechariah 7. I will scatter them with a whirlwind among all nations whom they knew not. There's these consistent things, scattering out to nations, people they don't know. And the land was desolate, no man. So the place where they left, there'll be nothing left while they're gone. And look, even right up until the day of this prophecy almost, come across to Luke 21. So right throughout the Old Testament, even into the New Testament, this continued prophecy was given of the nation. And so Luke 21, the words of Christ himself, talking and echoes the words of our readings in Deuteronomy 28. And in Luke 21, in verse 20, Jesus says, and when ye shall see Jerusalem compassed with armies, then know thereof the desolation is nigh. So once again, your city is going to be besieged. Verse 22, for these be the days of vengeance, that all things which are written may be fulfilled. We've seen all these verses we saw before in Deuteronomy, all these things that are written, they're going to be fulfilled, Jesus said. So they hadn't been fulfilled yet. Verse 24, they shall fall by the edge of sword, they shall be led away captive into all nations. Jerusalem shall be trodden down of the Gentiles, until the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled. And so we have this consistent message we look through, as we said there. They're going to be besieged. Your cities are going to be destroyed. You're going to be spread out. Even once again, we have this until the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled. Remember, we saw that in our first quote in Romans 11. This time that the Jews would be given away until the time of the Gentiles would be fulfilled. And then what would happen? Well, we'll see that in a minute. What happens after the Gentiles have had their way? But here we have these numerous prophecies that prophesied this. And we know it's came to pass exactly as all of these prophecies predicted. In fact, we know from relatively recent history that's exactly what happened as far as Jerusalem's concerned in AD 70. And I thought, what's a way to demonstrate this, and what's a way that potentially we can use to demonstrate to other people? So I thought, well, Wikipedia, it's not exactly the world's most reliable source of information, but it's free, it's available to everyone, it's easy, and it's also unbiased when it comes to religious things. Often it will take a very non-religious view of things, so it certainly isn't held up as a religious document. But even if we turn to Wikipedia itself, something we can tell our friends easily about, so I'll just use that for tonight, we see that it confirms these prophecies are fulfilled. We don't need to go to ancient texts and try and weasel them to make what we need to say. AD 70 is very clearly a fulfilment of these prophecies. Here in AD 70, the siege of Jerusalem. And I can't see it on my thing, so I'll have to look at it here, sorry. The Roman army, led by the future Emperor Titus, came down to take on the nation. And here's just some quotes from some of the witnesses. As they neared the sanctuary, they pretended to not even hear Caesar's commands and urged the men in front to throw in more firebrands. Now, the sanctuary is the temple. The partisans were no longer in a position to help. Everywhere was slaughter and fight. Most of the victims were peaceful citizens, weak and unarmed, butchered where they were caught. Round the altar, and heaps of corpses grew higher and higher, while down the sanctuary steps poured a river of blood, and the bodies of those killed at the top slithered to the bottom. Dramatic. And isn't that does that reminisce of what Shem read this morning, the dramaticness and the confrontingness of that prophecy, equally fulfilled here in the eyewitnesses' accounts of these. As for all the rest of the walls, it was so thoroughly laid, even the ground by which they dug up from the foundation, there was nothing left to make those that came hither believe that Jerusalem had ever been inhabited. Down the bit of the last little bit there. Nor could any foreigner that had formerly seen Judea and the most beautiful suburbs of the city, and now saw it as desert, but lament and mourn sadly that so great a change. And as Deuteronomy said, there would be nothing left there. Your cities would be inhabitable, nothing left at all, and you would be completely gone. That's exactly as we have seen happen in AD 70. The place was completely destroyed as it went on. And it wasn't just the destruction of AD 70. That was the cities, but we read more about as well, the people being dispersed throughout the land. And that's exactly what we happened. And once again, go to Wikipedia. It's all there. The complete destruction of Jerusalem and the settlement of several Greek and Roman colonies in Judea and the land of Israel. And they changed the name, so they wanted to get rid of the name altogether, indicate the intention of the Roman government to prevent the political regeneration of the Jewish nation and sever the connection to their homeland. So this isn't just a once-off destruction of a city. The Roman Empire, the greatest empire of that time and arguably of for thousands of years, sets its mind, we are going to destroy the Jewish people. We are going to wipe them off the face of the earth, as we have done with countless other civilizations. The will now of the Roman Empire is going to destroy and systematically remove this nation. So from this time on, in spite of unimportant movements under these generals here, the Jews reduced in number, destitute and crushed, lost their preeminence in their own homeland. Jerusalem had become under the name, as we said, they changed their name. It became a colony, a pagan city, so much so that the Jews were forbidden to even come into the city after this period. So they weren't even allowed in. So this is systematic, as I said, destruction of the people. Many Jews entered the diaspora, or the spreading out, as slaves after the destruction of the temple. They were enfranchised, often remained in their land of former slavery, establishing communities. Okay, and continued on after this. The Romans engaged in mass executions, expulsions, enslavement, destroying large numbers of the Judean towns, forbidding Jews to settle in Jerusalem or its area. There were no further Jewish government, legal system there. This was effectively turned into the expatriate Jews of the diaspora into a permanently exiled people, deprived of their homeland. Once again, this is exactly what we're reading in these Deuteronomy 28 and passages. But The amazing thing is that they spread these people out, and they would find distress in the nations. Remember, I will scatter you to a people that you don't know. You will spend a lot of time there. You'll be completely distressed and in slavery and over those things. A very difficult time. But the amazing thing, as much as the Roman Empire and the many nations afterwards that wanted to eradicate the Jewish people, as they did, we can't go to the place of the Incas, can't go to the place of the Philistines or the Babylonians. It happens. People are completely eradicated out of history, destroyed, and that's what the Roman Empire wanted to do to the Jewish people. But just as miraculously as God prophesied these things, God preserved these people as well. The Jewish people are a witness to God. They can't just be completely destroyed. God has plans for this people. God has prophecies in place for these people. And so it's just as much a miracle that they weren't destroyed. The Roman Empire wasn't able to wipe these people out, despite forbidding them in the city, despite spreading them around the world, despite the constant persecution. They kept an identity. They kept a voice, and they survived. The angels worked just as hard in this period, keeping the Jewish people alive and keeping their identity, as they did in the previous 1,000 years before of building up to have them destroyed and spread throughout. And it's very important, because the God that prophesied that they would be scattered also prophesied that they would survive and that they would return to the land of Israel. And so we see many, many passages about this equally as well. Jeremiah, I will cause them to return to the land that I gave to their fathers, and they shall possess it. Jeremiah 31, hear the word of Yahweh, O you nations, declare it in the isles afar off. He that scattered Israel will gather them. So as much, God says, as much as that was proof that I scattered them, I will gather them again to prove that I am God again. Ezekiel, thus saith Yahweh, I will even gather you from the people, I'll assemble you out of the countries wherever you have been scattered, and I will give you the land of Israel. So it's not just enough that I will bring you back. Specifically here promised, God says, I'm going to bring you back to Israel. And we'll see the importance of that in a minute. And Ezekiel again, 37, behold, I will take the children of Israel from among the heathen, whither they be gone. I will gather them on every side. I will bring them into their own land. Once again, that's specifically prophesied. And I will make them one nation in the land upon the mountain of Israel. And one king shall be king of them all. As we'll see later on. And so we have these amazing prophecies fulfilled. And these are really exciting for our generation and our time. Because up until 1948, up until those time periods, less than 100 years ago, these prophecies were not fulfilled. People could turn up these prophecies and say to us, well, I don't see Israel on the map. I don't see Jewish people gathered together. These prophecies haven't come to pass. They're a joke. Your God is not real. The Bible's not real. I don't believe in this. And they could have done that. You cannot do that anymore. As of that period, 1948, as of the Zionist movement, as of today, every single one of those verses has come to pass in some form. Not all of it. As we see there, one king gathered together as one nation. They're still to come. But these have now been fulfilled. Exactly as God prophesied. They are a witness. God said, I'm going to spread them out and I'm going to bring them back. You can go to it. We know all that. We know this has been fulfilled. It's a phenomenal proof. God said it would happen. As we said, it hasn't happened with other nations. There's many, many other nations, civilizations, people that had this same spreading, this same Roman, whatever, it doesn't, not even the Romans, other nations destroying them. They disappeared off the face of the earth, let alone regather again and then regather back to their own homeland. And it's been an important year, hasn't it? We've seen all this information. We've had the Balfour Declaration last month, 100 year of that. We've seen the 50-year anniversary of the Six-Day War. We've seen then all the significant reminders that have happened this year that the Jewish people are back in their land. And once again, there's lots of proof around Wikipedia and things like that highlight this. And I thought one that was relevant is the Balfour Declaration. Obviously last month was the anniversary of that. But what struck me was, this is just once again out of Wikipedia, you can't see it in the blue, but there is a link there, but look at this last sort of paragraph here. Zionist leader Wiseman, later president of the World Zionist Organisation, moved from Switzerland to the UK, and he met Arthur Balfour, the Prime Minister, and this was their first discussion around the Balfour Declaration. And Balfour asked what Wiseman's objections had been to the Uganda scheme that Herzl had supported to provide a portion of British East Africa to the Jewish people as a homeland. Wiseman responded that the English are to London as the Jews are to Jerusalem, a very famous quote. But we go back to this point, and I want to just go down this little path a little bit. And once again, all we're going to use is Wikipedia. But I want to show you it wasn't guaranteed that the nation of Israel would come back to Israel. And we saw those two quotes. God's promised that they would. But there's lots of other options. So this is the Uganda program that was mentioned there that was quite popular. So it was a plan to have this section, which I think is around Kenya today, was going to be given to the Jewish people, and they could all go back to there. And the Jews at the time were not against it. It was presented to the Zionist movement. They thought, look, this is not a bad idea. Theodor Herzl, as I said, he even agreed with this. So they actually sent a three-man delegation was sent to inspect this area and to consider its suitability. However, the observers found a dangerous land filled with lions and other creatures. Moreover, it was populated by a large number of Maasai who did not seem at all amenable to the influx of people coming from Europe. You can only imagine what they did. So they realised, look, this is not a hospitable land. It's full of wild animals. It's full of wild tribesmen. And so they passed on the whole thing. And Herzl died, and it sort of fell out of favour. But this was a genuine option there at the time. Another option was in the USSR. There was actually an autonomous region given to the Jews that they could use as a homeland. Right over here at the ends of the earth, it was given to them, and they said, right, this is completely autonomous, the Jews can come, and they can come and stay and live here. And a lot of Jews did. Upwards of 3,000 of them lived in this area, and then they started to get persecuted, and they dispersed, and it wasn't no longer favourable. But at a time, this was, in fact, I think there's still a Jewish newspaper there today I read at one time, but it's still a very Jewish area here in this region. This was given to the Jews. That was going to be one potential one. Here's another one which is quite sobering, but this was called the Madagascar solution. Some of you may be aware of it. So here, I'll just read a couple of things. Alfred Rosenberg, supervisor of the spiritual and philosophical development of the Nazism, proposed that reservations be allowed to Jewish under international control in either Uganda or Madagascar. Room should be made for 12 to 15 million Jews. Under this plan, he advanced to diplomats and newspapermen last night, with assertion that Germany still was determined to get rid of every Jew. So this was their Jewish problem. So this is their solution before the final solution, which we unfortunately know was let's just kill them all. But before that, they suggested, well, why don't we ship them off to a reservation there and they can live there. The second part here. He opposed Palestine as a Jewish homeland, that the territory be set aside with contribution by Jewish millionaires and billionaires from all around the world. So they're going to buy this area in Madagascar and the Jews can live there. It would be a place as a reservation, and they would be under supervision. No self-rule or establishment of a Jewish state. Palestine, Rosenberg said, was too small, and experience had shown that England could not come to agreement with the Arabs. An Arab-Jew conference with the British was now going on in London. So you say, look, it's never going to happen. Palestine, it's too much problem. It's not going to happen there. Madagascar is the place. And you see that little third column there. I stress the word reservation, for there can be no talk either at present or in future about a Jewish state. And so even at this time there was undercurrents. And the Nazis are saying, no, these Jews are the problem. We're going to ship them off and send them to Madagascar. And that unfortunately fell apart, and as we said, unfortunately moved to the final solution, which was just the annihilation of the Jews. But at one time, it was going to be Madagascar. So we can't take for granted that the Jews were going to go to their homeland. This one I thought was very interesting. At one time, Tasmania was proposed as a place for the Zionist movement. So it was supported by the Premier, Robert Cosgrove, said, yep, I'm happy for a section of Tasmania to be sectioned aside and that to be the new Jewish homeland. And so Critchley Parker Jr. proposed that it go there. He surveyed the area. In fact, he went out there and he surveyed the area. In fact, he was inexperienced in hiking and he actually died. You can go, there's pictures of his tombstone there out in the Tasmanian bush there where he died. And after he died, the idea sort of fell apart providentially. But at one point, Tasmania was seriously considered for the homeland of the Jews. So the Premier said he accepts in principle the proposal that a settlement of Jewish migrants should be established in Tasmania. And so all of these numerous options, but God had said, no, you're going to return to the land of Israel. You're going to return to the mountains of Israel. And so all these various schemes and ideas were tried to be played out, but no, they couldn't be fulfilled. God ensured that they went back to their land. Now, as we know, I said there, the Balfour Declaration and all that was told there, and then the amazing prophecy and the things that went on. It's not just a letter, it then went on to law so that it couldn't be changed, and all of the, and Matt Oliver touched on it a couple of weeks ago, all the convoluted things that had to happen on the world scene to make this come about. But it happened, and the Jewish people came back to their land. And so that then brings us to our time now. We've looked at the past with the Jews, laid out perfectly throughout the Old Testament, even up to the New Testament, fulfilled exactly as prophesied. Then the other prophecy said, look, they will return to the land, they will have their nation back again, fulfilled exactly as God had said. So what about the future? What's the witness that we have today? Well, God said they'll return back to the land, as I said, and they're starting to. I think the tipping point was recently where there's more Jews inside the land than those outside in other areas. But still, there's lots of Jews around the area. So this hasn't been totally fulfilled. And the Bible really talks about almost this fulfillment being in two parts. One initially, but ultimately the total fulfillment when all of the Jewish people come back to the land and they turn back to God. So it's not just a physical returning back, but a spiritual returning back as well. And there's a lot of prophecies that relate to that. And I thought one specific one that we can come to is Ezekiel 38, a cornerstone of our faith and of our hope in the future. Let's have a look at some of the key verses in Ezekiel 38 surrounding the nation of Israel. Now, it's a prophecy, as we said, that we're familiar with, but let's just pick up a couple of verses. Verse 8, Ezekiel 38, after many days thou shalt be visited in the latter years. As we know, these are key terms that help remind us that we're talking about future events. Thou shalt come into the land that is brought back from the sword, and is gathered out of many people against the mountains of Israel, which have been always waste, but is brought forth out of the nations, and they shall dwell safely, all of them. Verse 11, and thou shalt say, I will go up to the land of unwalled villages. I will go to them that are at rest, that dwell safely, all of them dwelling without walls and having neither bars nor gates. To take a spoil, to take a prey, to turn thine hand upon the desolate places that are now inhabited, upon the people that are gathered out of the nations, which have gotten cattle and goods, and dwell in the midst of the land. And then we know that the prophecy goes on, which we're all familiar with, and it leads then to the return of the saints and of Jesus Christ to start the kingdom. So Ezekiel 38, 39 are fundamental passages to the future of our faith. But in order for Ezekiel 38 to be fulfilled, the land of Israel would be desolate for a long time. The people of Israel would be gathered out of the nations to inhabit their land. You see there in those verses? They would acquire wealth and goods and build up a nation, and they'll dwell there in safety. It wouldn't just be a couple of people dwelling there. It's a nation there. They've got a presence. So once again, in order for even Ezekiel 38 to occur, at 39, for our hope to be fulfilled, 70 years ago, we couldn't have said that. That Israel weren't in the land, these things hadn't been fulfilled, but now they have. And so we've seen that right up until this point, everything has been prophesied and come to pass exactly as God foretold. And so we can have confidence that the rest of the chapter the chapters moving on from Ezekiel 38 will be fulfilled in ultimate and minute detail as the start of this chapter has been. That's the confidence that we have because of what has gone before. That's why Israel is a witness to us today for our faith. God says, I am real, I am working in the land, and here's proof. See, all of Israel here is my witness. These things have occurred, and therefore we can believe that God is working in our lives now, and we can have confidence that what is prophesied in the future will also come to pass. Why? Well, verse 23 there, he says there that we can have confidence that I will magnify myself, sanctify myself, I will be known in the eyes of many nations, and they shall know that I am Yahweh. And so the end of all of this is God proclaiming himself, the conversion of the world, and people will know that I am Yahweh. So we're known right up that to this point has been fulfilled. And so there's no reason that things like verse 23 onwards and things like that won't be fulfilled. God will reveal himself to the nations. That is our hope. So come across to our final quote then tonight, Hebrews chapter 6. We can have confidence in these things. We can base the way that we live our lives on the Bible because God has been consistently right all of that time. God doesn't, as we said, God doesn't ask for blind faith or blind trust. He gives us these important signposts. And so if we look at Hebrews chapter 6 and verse 13, almost coming full circle to what we've considered tonight. Verse 13, for when God made promises to Abraham, because he could swear by no greater, he swore by himself, saying, surely blessing I will bless thee, and multiply I will multiply. And that's what we read, didn't we? We were in Genesis. And God swore by himself, because these things cannot be moved. And by baptism, we know we can be a part of that seed, a part of that blessing. But if we look down at verse 17 there, wherein God more abundantly to show unto the heirs of the promise the immutability or the unchangeability. And remember, we're the heirs of that promise because we're baptised. So he wanted to show to us the unchangeability of his counsel, confirmed it by an oath, that by two unchangeable things in which it is impossible for God to lie, we might have strong consolation or strong comfort who have fled for refuge to lay hold upon the hope set before us, which hope we have as an anchor of the soul, both sure and steadfast, which entereth into the veil. And that's what we have seen tonight. God said, I've promised all of these things. I've sworn them by myself, and I've sworn them by the people of Israel. They are my witness. And so Paul tells us this is an anchor for our hope. We can look at these things. Our faith is not wavering. Our faith is not based on man's word or on wishy-washy prophecies. But this is a sure anchor. We can anchor our faith into the nation of Israel, into what God has promised about those people. They are his witness. He says that is sure and steadfast. That the God that we worship, that we base our lives and our hope on, is real and is working in our lives even today.